under the golden lights of a Parisian hotel ballroom, while the world around me clinked champagne glasses and laughed under chandeliers, I stood frozen, pregnant, tired, clinging to the last shreds of a life I thought was mine. I was 7 months into carrying our 4th child, wearing the same soft blue silk dress Daniel had once said made me glow. But his eyes that night weren't on me. They hadn't been for a while. He was looking at her. I remember every detail. Her laughter, sharp and unbothered, cutting through the jazz music, the way her hand lingered on his chest as she whispered something into his ear. And then, he laughed too. A laugh I hadn't heard in months. A laugh that wasn't mine to own anymore. What shattered me wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the realization that my husband of 10 years was sleeping with a 25-year-old intern named Sienna. What destroyed me was that she had warned me. The first time I met her, she smirked at my pregnant belly and said with mock innocence, "You better keep your game up, Isabelle. Men don't wait forever." I laughed then. I thought she was joking. Now I know it was a promise. That night in Paris, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the wine glass in my hand, though every nerve in my body begged me to. I walked out, alone, past the fountains, past the tourists, past the glowing Eiffel Tower that suddenly looked like a monument to everything I'd lost. And the next morning, while I was eating a croissant with trembling hands at a quiet cafe on Rue Claire, Daniel texted, 5 words, "I think we should talk." By the end of the week, he had moved out. Sienna helped him pack. She even smiled at me on the front lawn, one hand gripping my husband's arm, the other waving at our 3 daughters through the car window. She didn't just steal my husband. She did it with flair, like it was a performance, a victory lap. I was 36, alone, pregnant. My marriage had collapsed faster than I could process it. The man I thought would hold my hand in the delivery room was now posting beach photos with her in Santorini. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even my mother. For weeks, I wandered through our lake house in Seattle, brushing past baby clothes and wedding portraits like a ghost in my own life. The silence was unbearable. But in that silence, something happened. I broke. Then I rebuilt. This is not just a story of infidelity. This is a story of what happens after the betrayal, of how pain can be a forge, how a woman can be shattered, and still return sharper, stronger, more focused than ever. You see, most people think heartbreak is loud, that it comes with yelling, with revenge, with wine-soaked nights and angry voicemails. But the deepest heartbreak? It's quiet. It's making dinner for your kids when your chest is caving in. It's smiling during bedtime stories when your soul is screaming. But pain is a brilliant teacher. I began writing, just a little each day. Sometimes only a paragraph. Sometimes just a sentence. At first it was only for me, a way to stay sane. But then I started publishing anonymously on a blog. I called it Strong Her. And I found something unexpected. Women from all over the country wrote back. Some had been cheated on while pregnant. Some had been abandoned for younger women. Some were just tired of being told to stay strong when all they wanted was to scream. We became a tribe. I still remember the first time I received a message from a woman in North Carolina. She said, "You told my story, but braver." And I realized then that my voice wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman who had ever been left behind and made to feel like less. I won't lie and tell you it got better overnight. There were nights I stood in the nursery and cried until my knees gave out. There were mornings I couldn't get out of bed. The sheets felt like chains. And there were memories, good ones, that haunted me more than the bad. But I had my children. My girls. They didn't know the full story. They didn't see what their father had done. And I vowed they never would, because no matter what Daniel had done to me, he was still their dad. I would never poison their hearts. That was my line, in the sand. I would protect their childhood, even if mine as a wife had been stolen. So when the divorce began, I did it with grace. Or at least that's what I told myself. Truthfully, I was a storm inside. But I smiled in court. I nodded politely during custody meetings. I agreed to 50-50 visitation because I believed my kids deserved two parents, even if one of them had chosen a girl barely out of college. I got the house, most of the assets, and something more valuable, a clean start. I changed my number, blocked Daniel and Sienna on everything. I set rules. They could speak to me about the children only, nothing more. No small talk, no updates on their lives. But of course, Sienna didn't respect boundaries. She showed up for pickups instead of Daniel, always overdressed, always smiling too brightly. She would lean in and say things like, "You know, Isabelle, you and I have more in common than you think." I never responded, until one day, she came with a box of cupcakes and said, "We're engaged, and I want you to be a bridesmaid, the girls too." I stared at her. I had 10 minutes to get our cat to the emergency vet, and this woman was talking to me about chiffon dress colors. I mumbled, "Uh-huh," and closed the door. A few hours later, Daniel texted me, "You could have been more supportive. That's..." When I realized they didn't want peace. They wanted performance. They wanted me to pretend the fire they set hadn't burned my world down. They wanted me to smile through the ashes. I wouldn't. This was just the beginning. The start of a story that would twist and darken and ignite in ways I never could have imagined. A story that would include restraining orders, police reports, and courtroom confessions. A story that, despite its darkness, would end with me standing in the light again. Because here's the truth. Sometimes, when you're abandoned at your lowest, you don't just rise, you reinvent. You rebuild not the life you had, but the life you deserved all along. And if you've ever been broken, betrayed, or brought to your knees by someone who promised to love you forever, this story is for you. If you want to hear the full story, the terrifying turns and the moment I took my power back, make sure to subscribe. Your support helps me bring more raw, real, and unfiltered stories like this to life. It means the world. Now tell me, what do you think hurts more? A. Being betrayed by the person you trusted most. B. Being mocked by the person who replaced you. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B, and let's talk about it. You won't want to miss what happens next. The weeks following the divorce were not filled with champagne toasts or victorious sighs. They were quieter, sharper, like walking barefoot across broken glass in your own home, the one you used to fill with laughter and holiday decorations, now eerily silent. That silence was both my punishment and my reward. I had signed the papers. I had watched Daniel do the same, his face blank, as if we were finalizing a real estate deal and not the end of a decade-long marriage. The ink was still drying when the real weight of it all settled on my shoulders. I was no longer his wife. He was no longer my partner. We were now two people bound only by biology, 3 daughters and a newborn son who hadn't even opened, his eyes to the world before everything changed. In the eyes of the law, I won. I kept the house on Lake Washington, the car, the savings. Our prenuptial agreement, coupled with Daniel's own recklessness, left me in a better financial position than I expected. But winning a divorce is a strange, hollow thing. The courtroom may give you assets, but it doesn't hand you back your peace. I spent the early mornings after the divorce, wrapped up pacing the hardwood floors with my son Ezra, nestled against my shoulder. He was beautiful. Soft brown curls like his sister's, the faintest dimple on his chin. His eyes would search mine as if trying to understand why the energy around him was heavy, why his mother's heartbeat seemed just a little too fast. I wasn't Sure, if it was postpartum anxiety or the residue of betrayal, but I often found myself needing to remind my body to breathe, deeply, fully, intentionally. And every time I managed that, I told myself, "You're still here, Isabelle. You're still standing." Daniel, meanwhile, moved on seamlessly. Or at least, that's what he wanted the world to believe. He and Sienna went on a celebratory trip to Tulum a week after the divorce was finalized. Photos flooded social media. Him shirtless on the beach, Sienna in a white bikini pressed against his side, the caption reading, "Fresh starts taste like salt water and second chances." Friends of ours liked the photo. Some even commented, "The betrayal came in waves." Not just from him, but from everyone who pretended it was normal. I didn't reply. I didn't post in response. But I did something I never thought I would. I unfollowed Daniel. I unfriended his family. I even asked my sister to manage my social accounts for a while because I couldn't stomach watching the narrative they were trying to spin. That he had fallen in love, that life had simply moved forward, that I was the bitter ex clinging to the past. They didn't know the truth, and more importantly, I realized, they didn't need to. What mattered now was not controlling the story, but rewriting my own. But the past has a strange way of clinging to you, especially when it's wearing perfume and designer heels. Sienna, who by all accounts should have been satisfied with her win, refused to stay in her lane. She began showing up for the girls, pickups instead of Daniel. Always early, always chipper, always overdressed. Her favorite tactic was to bring them small gifts, bracelets, headbands, nail polish, then stand at my front door like she expected me to thank her. One time, she handed me a pink box of frosted cupcakes, her diamond ring catching the light as she said, "We're getting married. I'd love for you to be a bridesmaid. For the girls' sake, of course." She said it so sincerely, so sweetly, that for a brief second, I wondered if she truly believed the words coming out of her mouth. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I nodded, murmured something unintelligible, and closed the door. Later that day, Daniel texted, "You could have been a little more gracious. She's trying." I stared at the message until the words blurred, and then I laughed, out loud, alone. In my kitchen, holding Ezra on my hip, I laughed until tears welled in my eyes. Was that what they thought this was? A reconciliation dinner party? A rom-com sequel where the ex-wife becomes besties with the mistress turned stepmom? No, this wasn't a fairy tale. This was my life, and it was mine to protect. By September, Sienna was pregnant. I found out not from Daniel, but from Sienna herself, who once again arrived at pickup wearing a fitted cream dress that accentuated the bump. She placed a hand over her belly and said, "We're expecting. Just found out it's a boy. The girls are going to have a little brother. How exciting, right?" Her eyes sparkled like it was some kind of cosmic joke. I smiled tightly. "Congratulations," I said, then turned and walked inside. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't journal. I didn't call anyone. I simply lay on the couch, Ezra asleep on my chest, and stared at the ceiling, breathing through the sting of it all. Because the truth was, I had expected this. Daniel was always chasing something newer, shinier. I had just never imagined he'd go so far as to rebuild a life he abandoned with someone barely old enough to rent a car. But what came next? I couldn't have prepared for. In December, just days before Christmas, Sienna showed up again. This time she looked smug, victorious. As I opened the door, she didn't say hello. She simply placed a manicured hand over her stomach and announced, "It's a boy. Daniel's finally getting a son." And before I could stop myself, I responded, "I'm sure Lord Daniel is thrilled, an heir to carry on his noble name and beachfront selfies." She blinked, confused, then red-faced. The girls giggled from the hallway behind me, sensing something but not quite sure what. And when Daniel called later that night to scold me, I knew I had hit a nerve. Apparently, Daniel's family had found my comment hilarious. His mother, who once adored Sienna, had even quoted it at dinner. That was the first sign that cracks were forming on their side, too. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. All I felt was tired. And that's when I realized something fundamental had shifted inside me. I no longer cared about them. Not in the bitter, angry way, but in the hollow, uninterested way. I didn't think about them at night. I didn't replay their words in my head. I didn't analyze their posts or predict their next move. They had become background noise in a life I was slowly rebuilding from the ground up. But the universe has a way of testing you when you start to feel steady. That winter, I received a letter from Daniel's lawyer. It was formal, stiffly worded, and dripping with faux concern. He was requesting a co-parenting summit, not just with me and him, but with Sienna and the kids as well. Family therapy, he called it. A way to reestablish a healthy dynamic for the children. I reread the letter 5 times. There was nothing healthy about sitting in a room with the man who broke me and the woman who delighted in my pain. Nothing therapeutic about pretending they deserved a seat at the same table where my children's trust was being built. So I declined, politely, firmly. If the kids need a therapist, I wrote, I'm happy to find a licensed professional, but I will not participate in family therapy with individuals who have yet to acknowledge the damage they've caused. Daniel was furious. He left 3 voicemails. The last one ended with him shouting, "You're being impossible, Isabelle." And maybe I was. But I had learned, at great cost, that peace sometimes comes at the price of being misunderstood. I could no longer live for other people's comfort. So I turned inward, focused on the kids, on my writing, on small things, like repainting the guest room, adopting a rescue dog, learning how to bake sourdough from scratch. They were small acts, but they were mine. And every time I chose stillness over drama, silence over reaction, I was reclaiming myself. And that, more than any court ruling, was the real victory. What's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew about this story. Because when grief turns to obsession, people start to unravel. And soon, Sienna's perfect life will begin to crack. But that's for next time. Because this is only the beginning. It was the middle of January when I opened the door and found Sienna standing on my porch again. Her eyes were red, not with the kind of redness you get from tears, but the kind that comes from not sleeping for days. Her coat hung limply from her shoulders, one sleeve off as if she had rushed to throw it on before running out into the cold. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I could tell something had happened. "We lost the baby," she said. No greeting, no apology. Just those 4 words, hurled into the space between us like a stone in still water. I didn't react. My expression didn't change. I had nothing to offer her. Not compassion, not sympathy, not even a hollow, "I'm sorry." I wasn't sorry. That sounds brutal, maybe even monstrous. But the truth is, I had spent too long stitching myself back together from the damage she had helped create. I didn't owe her anything, least of all, pity. "I just wanted to let you know," she continued, voice trembling now. Since your girls were going to be his sisters, I thought it mattered. Still, I said nothing. "I don't know why," she said softly. "But I keep thinking it's because of what I did to you. Like karma." And that's when I finally spoke. "You need to leave, Sienna." She looked like she was going to argue, but I shut the door. Inside, Ezra was wailing in his crib. My middle daughter had spilled juice all over the kitchen floor. The dog had thrown up in the hallway. My life, even in chaos, was still moving forward. Hers had clearly come to a grinding halt. A few hours later, Daniel texted. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't check in on the kids. He just said, "You could have shown a little humanity. She's hurting." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because every word he typed reeked of entitlement, as if Sienna's grief now qualified her for a forgiveness she had never asked for in the first place, as if I was cruel for not offering comfort to the woman who had practically danced on the ashes of my marriage. And yet, not long after, I found myself questioning my reaction. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because his parents called. Daniel's mother, who had always maintained a cautious but kind relationship with me, said she was disappointed in how I handled the news. "She lost a child," she told me, her voice cracking. "That was our grandchild, too." I understood. On a human level, I did. But understanding doesn't always equate to emotional responsibility. I told her, kindly but firmly, that I would not comfort the woman who once bragged about stealing. My husband while I was pregnant, who made my children feel confused and divided, who had turned every interaction into a performance designed to provoke me. It didn't end there. A week later, Sienna showed up again. This time she was crying. Loud, heaving sobs. She stood at my doorstep begging me to forgive her, claiming she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, that she was haunted by what she'd done. "I need you to tell me it's okay," she said, "that I'm not a terrible person." I didn't open the door. I spoke through the security system. "You need to leave my property, now." "I'm sorry," she screamed. "I'm so sorry. I just want to be friends. I need you to forgive me so I can live with myself." It was then I realized what she wanted wasn't forgiveness. It was absolution. And she wasn't going to get it. Not from me. I called the police. She wasn't arrested. She was just escorted off the property. But it was enough to rattle me. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did my brother, who began staying with me full-time after that. It was no longer just about emotional manipulation. It was turning into something darker, something obsessive. The next day, I texted Daniel. I told him that until further notice, I wanted him or his mother to handle all pickups and drop-offs. I cited Sienna's mental state and said I didn't think it was a stable environment for the girls. He called. Immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. Then I texted back, "Please keep this to texts only." He insisted he wanted a conversation. "A real one," he said. "Not about the kids, about all of us. About where we go from here." I stared at that message for a long time. It was such a simple line, but it vibrated with so much implication. What did he think would happen? That I'd hear his voice and suddenly remember the good times? That I'd open the door to reconciliation just because his new life was falling apart? I responded, "If you think the girls need therapy, I'm happy to arrange that. But there is no us. Not anymore." He didn't respond for hours, and when he did, it was with a single thumbs-up emoji. That's when I knew it was done. Whatever thread he had been trying to tug at had finally snapped. Still, the anxiety didn't go away. I kept my lawyer informed. I began collecting every message, every incident, documenting it all. I had this growing sense that things were about to get worse before they got better. And I was right. 2 weeks later, I was upstairs folding laundry when my oldest daughter came rushing into the room. "Mom," she said, "Sienna texted me." I froze. My stomach dropped. What did she say? She just asked how I was doing. But it felt weird. She said, she missed me. That night, I went through my daughter's phone with her. There were dozens of messages. Nothing overtly threatening, but all inappropriate. long, emotional monologues about how sad Sienna was, how much she missed the girls, how she wished things were different. It was emotional blackmail, thinly veiled. As affection, I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I left a message. If she contacts my kids again directly, I will take you to court for full custody. The next day, Daniel's sister, who had always kept a distance from the drama, called me. She said she'd been speaking to Daniel recently and that he seemed off, that Sienna's grief had become volatile. She told me, "If you're thinking about full custody, I'll support you. So will Mom. We're done making excuses for him." It was the first time I felt I had true backup from his side of the family, but that didn't stop what came next. 3 nights later, I was getting Ezra ready for bed when I noticed a shadow pass by the side window. I glanced out and saw Sienna, sitting in her car in my driveway. She wasn't moving, just sitting, hands on the wheel, engine running, her face lit only by the dashboard glow. I didn't approach her. I called Daniel. No answer. I called the police again. They came, spoke to her, and once more, she was let off with a warning. That night, I installed cameras across the entire property, inside and out. I began sleeping with the bedroom door locked. My brother slept on the couch with a bat by his side. I was no longer just a woman recovering from betrayal. I was a mother preparing for war. And yet, through all of this, I still didn't say a single bad word about Daniel to our children. I kept their father's image clean for them. I allowed them to form their own opinions. And the incredible thing was, they did. My oldest daughter told Daniel during a visit, "Mom never says anything bad about you. But you and Sienna ask us too many questions about her. It's weird. Stop doing it." She told me later that she had memorized the phrase because she wanted to sound calm and strong when she said it. I cried in the bathroom that night, not out of sadness, but out of awe. Somehow, despite everything, I had raised a girl who knew how to set boundaries better than most adults. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. By February, I had stopped hoping for normal. I started preparing for permanent change. I met with my lawyer again. We began the paperwork for full custody and a restraining order. I knew the process would be long, draining, and expensive. But I also knew this. I was no longer just surviving. I was defending something sacred. My children. My peace. My home. Sati. Storm wasn't over, but I had learned to build shelter. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid anymore. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of quiet, chilly night that felt like the world had momentarily paused. I had just finished giving Ezra his bath, and the girls were curled up on the couch watching an animated movie. My brother had stepped out to grab groceries, and for once, the house felt still, as if it were holding its breath. I remember feeling a rare calm that evening, as though after months of tension and surveillance and late-night panic, my home had returned to me. I didn't know that moment was the last before everything would change again. Daniel had texted earlier that day asking if he could stop by to see the kids. I'd been cautious since Sienna's increasingly erratic behavior, but I agreed, on the condition that he come alone and that he stay in the garden or living room where everything was monitored. He responded with a brief, "Of course," followed by a thumbs up. I should have trusted my instinct, but fatigue can make you too generous. I was exhausted, of the fights, of the threats, of being the only one who seemed to care whether or not our children lived in peace. So I let him in. He arrived just before dinner. I let him take the girls outside to play while I brought Ezra upstairs to change. I didn't notice anything strange at first. His voice had been calm. He didn't look angry. In fact, if anything, he looked empty. worn, as if he too had been fighting his own kind of war. I went to shower, the water warm and grounding, and when I stepped out, towel-wrapped, half-dressed, still foggy from the steam, I found him standing in the hallway. Froze. He wasn't supposed to be inside. I clutched my robe, confused. "Daniel, what are you doing?" He didn't answer at first, just looked at me with eyes that didn't quite look like his. There was something wild in them, something desperate. "I needed to talk to you," he said. "Really talk." Then, "Say it," I told him, backing up slightly. "From there." "I made a mistake," he said, voice cracking. "She's not who I thought she was, Izzy. She's falling apart. She blames me for losing the baby. She screams at night. She talks about you in her sleep. I can't do it anymore." I didn't say anything. I just watched him. Because even in his unraveling, he still wasn't seeing me. He was looking through me into a fantasy he'd built about returning to a version of us that no longer existed. "I never stopped loving you," he said. I stepped back again. "Get out of my house, Daniel." That's when something shifted. His face hardened. His voice dropped. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said. "And if you don't leave now, I'll call the police." "You think I'm dangerous?" he asked. But it wasn't a question. It was a challenge, as if he needed to prove something. And then he stepped forward, closing the gap I had tried to create. I don't know if you've ever felt the world narrow into one single moment of fear, but in that instant, I did. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear his voice anymore. He reached out, too fast, and tried to grab my arm. I jerked away, yelling, but he kept talking, begging, demanding, saying things I won't repeat. Things that made my stomach twist with revulsion. Things that told me this wasn't the Daniel I had married. That Daniel was long gone. What happened? Next was a blur of motion. My brother burst up the stairs, having returned without me hearing him. I screamed again, this time not in fear, but in release. Relief. My brother shoved Daniel back, yelling louder than I'd ever heard him, forcing him down the hallway and into the living room where the kids were now crying, clinging to each. Other Ezra was screaming from his crib upstairs. It was chaos, pure chaos. The police were called. Daniel left before they arrived, claiming he had only come in for a glass of water. But the damage was already done. Not physically, thank God, but emotionally. The girls had seen too much, heard too much. That night, I didn't sleep. None of us did. My daughters took turns crawling into bed with me, asking if Daddy was in trouble, asking if Mommy was okay. I told them we were safe now, that Uncle Micah would stay with us for a while. And he did. He slept downstairs every night with the front door double-locked and his phone in his hand. The next day, I reviewed the footage from the hallway camera. I had installed a few weeks earlier to monitor the cats while I was at work. I had forgotten it was even there. But when I watched it, when I saw myself backing away from Daniel, saw his body language, heard the tone in his voice, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called my lawyer. I told her everything. We began the emergency process for full custody and a restraining order. It felt surreal. To be here, in this position, against someone I had once trusted with my life, someone I had built a family with. And yet there was no room for nostalgia now. My children had witnessed their father threatening their mother. That memory would not disappear. But I could ensure it didn't happen again. The hardest part wasn't the legal work. It was holding my daughters in the days that followed. My oldest wouldn't go anywhere without me. She hovered, watched the windows, flinched at loud noises. "It's not your fault," I told her again and again. "You didn't do anything wrong." But trauma doesn't listen to reason. It lingers, clings, mutates into self-blame in the minds of children. So I found a child therapist the next day. Someone warm. Someone experienced in custody conflict. We started sessions immediately. As for me, I compartmentalized. I became steel. I followed the legal process step by step. I collected witness statements from my brother and neighbors. I documented every call, every message. I stopped responding to Daniel entirely. My attorney became the buffer, and then came the wave of messages from Sienna, hundreds of them. Apologies, accusations, emotional outbursts. Some directed at me, others sent to my daughter through social media. My lawyer told me not to block her. "We need everything documented," she said. "Every word helps build your case." So I didn't block her. I collected everything, screenshots, voicemails, even a handwritten letter she left in our mailbox begging me to help Daniel. "He needs you," she wrote. "I thought I could fix him, but I can't. You're the only one who ever could." There was something chilling about that letter. It wasn't just desperation. It was delusion. The belief that I still had a role to play in the mess they had made. I didn't reply. Instead, I did what I had promised myself months ago. I protected my peace. I began planning our move. Quietly, carefully. I found a rental home across the state line, near the Oregon border. It was nothing fancy, just a modest home with a fenced yard and a quiet street. But it was safe. It was ours. I told the kids we'd be moving for a fresh start. They didn't fight it. They understood more than they could say. And on my final night in the house on Lake Washington, the home where I had once imagined growing old with Daniel, I stood alone in the nursery, Ezra asleep in my arms. The moonlight cast long shadows across the wall where decals of stars and clouds still clung to fading paint. This room had seen both heartbreak and healing, and as I looked around for the last time, I whispered, "Thank you." Not to the house, but to the woman I had been here. The woman who had survived, who had chosen dignity over vengeance, boundaries over chaos, love over bitterness. Because the truth is, healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet packing of boxes, the silent clicks of door locks, the steady collection of evidence, the patient listening to your children's fears. The refusal to rise to bait, it's in the steadiness, the stillness, the refusal to fall apart. That's where I found my strength, and I knew the worst was behind me. But the most important part was still ahead. A life built on truth. A future unshackled from his shadow. A life that was finally, truly mine. The first morning in the new house didn't begin with a sunrise. It began with silence. Not the eerie silence of tension or dread, like we'd lived through in the final months before leaving Seattle, but a different kind. Peaceful, expectant. Outside, birds sang into the gray light, and the scent of pine drifted through the open kitchen window. It was colder here near the Oregon border, and quieter. The kind of quiet that felt earned. I sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea, still in my robe, my son Ezra curled against my chest. The girls were inside, exploring their new rooms with the reverence of kids who know a new chapter is beginning. I had told them we were here to start fresh, to make this home ours in every sense. No ghosts, no shouting, no tension waiting behind every door. They accepted it with a grace that left me speechless. Children understand more than we think. They watch us, not our words, but our reactions, our resilience, our choices. I had fought hard to protect them not just from the chaos Daniel and Sienna had brought into our lives, but from the bitterness that could have consumed me if I'd let it. And now, we had finally reached the shore. The legal proceedings were still ongoing, but they were moving steadily in my favor. With the footage from the hallway camera, the police report, the therapist's written observations, and the volume of threatening or inappropriate messages from Sienna, my attorney was confident that full custody would be granted within the next few months. The restraining order was already in place. Daniel was not allowed within 500 feet of our home, our school, or any drop-off location. Communication now flowed solely through legal channels. For the first time in over a year, I could breathe. It wasn't just about physical safety. It was psychological, emotional. The relief of not having to anticipate his moods or her manipulation. The absence of their presence, once constant like background static, was a gift I hadn't realized I'd longed for so desperately. I spent those first few weeks rebuilding not just a home, but a rhythm. I painted the living room pale green. I planted herbs in mismatched ceramic pots along the windowsill. I adopted a senior dog from the local shelter, a gentle golden retriever named Maggie, who had been abandoned by her last family. The shelter said she didn't have long, maybe 6 months, but something in her eyes reminded me of myself, worn, but not finished. The girls adored her instantly. Ezra loved tugging her ears, and she let him, patiently, as though she understood, that he, too, had come from brokenness and needed softness. Every evening after homework and dinner, we lit candles and played music, sometimes jazz, sometimes lullabies, sometimes just the sound of rain from a playlist I found online. It was our ritual, our offering to the peace we were determined to protect. I also returned to writing. Strong Her had grown into more than a blog. Women from across the country reached out to me daily, some sharing their own stories, others simply thanking me for putting into words what they couldn't yet articulate. I never gave advice, not directly. I wasn't a therapist. I was a survivor. My only power was in telling the truth and letting that truth resonate where it needed to. One message stayed with me for days. It was from a woman in Ohio, a mother of 2, whose husband had left her during her second pregnancy for a woman he met at a conference. She wrote, "I was angry all the time, until I realized I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at myself for still needing closure. You helped me let that go." It struck something in me, because if I was honest, I had held on to that same anger for longer than I liked to admit. I hadn't wanted Daniel back. But I had wanted something. A reckoning. An apology, a collapse in which he realized what he'd done. But it never came. And maybe it never would. Closure, I was learning, isn't something you wait for. It's something you create. You carve it out from your pain, shape it with your boundaries, and place it like a stone marker at the edge of what used to be. I would never be who I was before Daniel betrayed me, but I had become someone I never imagined I could be. A woman who had faced devastation and rebuilt not only her life, but her heart. And it wasn't just about surviving. It was about rediscovering joy. I began hosting small gatherings in my home, book, club nights, tea circles, writing workshops. I started inviting women from the community, most of whom had no idea what I'd been through. We weren't there to rehash pain. We were there to grow something new. There was laughter in my house again. Soft, full-bodied laughter that came from the belly, not the throat. Laughter that meant something. One night, after a writing session, I walked into the nursery and found Ezra standing in his crib, reaching for the stars projected on the ceiling. His hands opened and closed like he was trying to catch the light. I stood there watching him, tears pricking at my eyes. He would never remember Daniel being part of our family. He would never remember the nights I cried myself to sleep, the screams, in the hallway, the way I once lived on edge. He would only know the version of me that rose from the ashes, the mother who danced barefoot in the kitchen and read stories with silly voices and showed him, by example, that healing is possible. That was enough. There were still bad days. There always are. Triggers I couldn't anticipate. Emails from my lawyer that made my chest tighten. A glance at an old photo while searching for school documents. But those moments no longer defined me. They passed like brief storms, and then the sun returned. One day, I received an invitation to speak at a local women's conference. The theme was Resilience in the Face of Ruin. I wasn't sure I was qualified. I wasn't a motivational speaker. I didn't have degrees in psychology or therapy. All I had was a story and scars that had healed into something that no longer hurt to touch. But I said yes. When I stepped onto that stage, wearing a simple dress and holding a printout of my speech in trembling hands, I looked out into a sea of women, young, old, tired, hopeful. And I told them the truth. Not just about Daniel or Sienna, but about what it meant to find yourself again, when the version of your life you thought you needed was gone. I spoke about dignity, about boundaries, about how sometimes strength looks like walking away without turning back, about how love, when real, doesn't make you choose between yourself and someone else. And I told them what I had learned, that forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you. That peace is a practice, and that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. Afterward, a woman came up to me in tears. She hugged me like we'd known each other for years. "Thank you," she said. "I thought I was the only one." I held her tightly. "You're never the only one, and neither was I." This chapter of my life didn't begin when Daniel left. It began when I realized I didn't need him to come back. It began the day I stopped trying to rewrite the past and started writing something entirely new. A future, a home, a life full of messy, beautiful, unfiltered joy. And that life is mine. Fully, finally, and without apology. There are stories we carry quietly, ones we live through and tuck into the deepest parts of ourselves, believing that no one else could possibly understand. But sometimes, when we speak those stories aloud, we find that we've been walking a path countless others have walked too, bleeding, healing, rebuilding, and rising. Isabelle's story is one of those paths. What began as a devastating betrayal transformed into a journey of reclaiming identity, setting boundaries, and ultimately redefining what it means to be whole. Her husband, Daniel, didn't just leave her while she was pregnant. He abandoned a version of life that they had spent years building. He left her for Sienna, a younger colleague, whose presence wasn't just painful but deliberately provocative. The betrayal wasn't quiet. It was public, brazen, cold. In the beginning, Isabelle's life fell apart in real time, during late-night feedings, courtroom proceedings, and front porch confrontations. She didn't have time to process her grief, because life, especially life with children, doesn't pause when your heart shatters. But slowly, deliberately, she started to rise. She didn't do it out of revenge or to show them. She did it for herself, for her children, for her future. She chose silence over spectacle, dignity over drama. Every time Sienna arrived with another passive-aggressive taunt disguised as friendliness, Isabelle responded with grace. Every time Daniel tried to re-enter her life through guilt or manipulation, she held her ground. And when their spiral of obsession, loss, and emotional instability threatened to infect her peace, she cut the cord entirely. She filed for custody. She installed cameras. She protected her children and herself, not out of hatred, but out of fierce love. When Daniel crossed the line, violating her space, ignoring boundaries, and ultimately attempting to force himself into her life again, Isabelle didn't just react. She documented, defended, and dismantled the system of chaos he and Sienna had been trying to build around her. She wasn't dramatic. She was strategic. She didn't scream. She enforced. And when the dust began to settle, when the court ruled in her favor and the noise of their obsession finally began to fade, she didn't look back. She moved. She started fresh. In a new home with her children, a rescue dog, and the kind of quiet that only comes after surviving a storm, she found herself again. Not the old self, the woman who had once begged for loyalty, who tolerated dismissiveness, who bent herself in every direction to hold a marriage together. That woman no longer existed, In her place stood someone wiser, someone stronger, someone who learned the difference between breaking and growing. What makes Isabelle's story powerful isn't just the betrayal. It's what came after. It's the refusal to be defined by the pain. It's the choice to live, fully and joyfully, not despite what happened, but because of what she now knows. She knows that love isn't measured by how long someone stays, but by how you choose to stay with yourself when everyone else leaves. She knows that peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of boundaries. And perhaps most importantly, she knows that the strongest revenge isn't destruction. It's creation. Creating a life so aligned with your worth that those who once broke you no longer have access to the version of you they hurt. Today, Isabelle leads writing circles. She speaks at conferences. She publishes stories of resilience and receives letters from strangers who call her brave, not because she fought, but because she healed. She's not perfect. She still has hard days. She still flinches at sudden loud voices. But she no longer lives in fear. She lives in truth. And that, more than anything, is what her children will remember. Not the betrayal, but the rebuilding. Not the anger, but the grace. So what can we learn from her? That your world falling apart may be the first step toward building one that's entirely yours. That survival is not a shameful thing. It is sacred, that you can forgive without ever letting someone back in. And that not every apology deserves your presence. In a world that often romanticizes forgiveness as reunion, Isabelle teaches us a deeper truth. That real forgiveness is reclaiming your energy and refusing to let pain dictate the rest of your life. You are allowed to outgrow the people who hurt you. You are allowed to leave the rooms where your voice isn't heard. And you are always, always allowed to start again. Now, here's a little reflection moment for you. Let's see how deeply you've connected to the story. Which do you believe takes more strength? A. Walking away from someone you once loved. B. Choosing not to hate the person who betrayed you. Comment your answer below with A or B and tell us why. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Also, I'd love to know, how did this story resonate with you? Have you been through something similar? What helped you find your way back to peace? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your experience too. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you hope, please subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and gives us the strength to keep creating content that speaks to the heart. This isn't just storytelling. This is survival, shared. Let's walk it together.